Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm excited to have this conversation, not only because we have one of the most talented documentary filmmakers of his or any other generation. He has been nominated for an Academy Award for his amazing film that won Best U.S. Doc here at the 2015 Film Festival. We are all very well familiar with the film Cartel Land. Today, we're going to have a conversation about a brand new and another very important film that is replete with images and stories that need to be told, that we all need to be more aware of. The place is Raqqa in Syria. The film is City of Ghosts, and the filmmaker I am sitting with this morning is director Matthew Heineman. Good morning, sir.
Right.
Nice to meet you, man.
Nice to meet you as well.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course.
So, as we joked a little bit, we're going to let Cartel Land rest for a moment because you have an important new film. And as I mentioned, we don't know a lot about it other than the kind of the set piece of it. Obviously, we're aware enough of to be very excited to see the film. For folks who may not have seen the synopsis or not aware of your new film, if you would please give an overview.
Sure, yeah. It's basically about a group of guys from Raqqa, Syria, who came together after their hometown was taken over by ISIS to expose the atrocities that ISIS was committing in their hometown. They were sort of, novice citizen journalists, no formal training, and started to publish photos, videos, documenting the atrocities of ISIS, and sort of one by one, several of them got killed. And so the film is basically following them as they are leaving Syria to Turkey and then eventually to Europe, sort of escaping from ISIS. And that's the through line of the film. But we constantly cut back and forth to the amazing footage that they have from inside Raqqa. And to this day, they still have guys, anonymous, who are inside Raqqa, still documenting, still doing their work, and it's partly a story of sort of this media war, this war of images, this war of ideas between these two groups, and ISIS uses this propaganda as a weapon, as much as they use their own weapons, and so these guys are trying to counter that with their own images of hopefully the truth.
Interesting that, and I think in the synopsis it was kind of paralleled that war takes place in 2016, 2017. War is taking place, as they always say, hearts and minds, as much on social media and through these self-drafted journalists, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially, it's become a buzzword in the U.S. right now, fake news, what is news, and I think now more than ever, this film is important to show how important seeking the truth is, how important journalism is, how important it is to, try to expose evil in the world. And this group, Raqqa's being slaughtered silently, has suffered immensely for doing this. And I think for all of the issues that are happening in this world, I think it's nice to know that there are people out there that are still fighting and trying to expose these things.
And can be called by their own passion and their love for their own country and their own home, their town.
Exactly, yeah. And I think they're motivated by many things, but I think at their core they're motivated by just the love of their city, the love of Syria. And but I think one of the interesting things for me when making this film is, at first it seemed very simple, of these guys versus ISIS and this war of ideology. And it ended up sort of turning into much more than that, and turned into sort of an immigrant story of as these guys were escaping and trying to find their way in a new world. It's partially a story of trauma and how one deals with trauma and how one, they've been through unimaginable things. And so, one of the things I tried to do was try to sort of pull away the onion of what that does to one inside of themselves. And there's a really dramatic scene at the end of the film that I think shows sort of what happens when one has to deal with that much trauma.
Maybe a similarity to your journey and your exploration in Cartel Land, and I remember the comments about how at the end of the filming or at the end of editing of that film, when you had been out and this good versus evil and these very sort of on-off switch black and white kind of characterizations of a situation, your film changes, your conclusions change, and it sounds like maybe that journey, and especially with the diaspora, for lack of a better way to put it, was an education for you in that way as well, maybe in this film?
Totally. I mean, I think the documentary form is a wonderful thing. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think what's great is there's so many different ways to tell stories. There's sort of filmmakers who put themselves in their stories. There's films that are written and scripted. For me, my style is trying to play off the reality of the human experience, and not scripting, not programming what's going to happen, but letting the story meander to wherever it goes. And I think that open-mindedness is something that I take very seriously, and I think is really important to allow the story to organically evolve. And I found, especially in Cartel Land and especially in this film, is that when you do that, you often find things that are deeply surprising, and ultimately, hopefully, the story is much more richer and not one-dimensional.
In Cartel Land, but at least by my interpretation of it, it was very first person in the shooter sense, in that most, if not all, of that footage was generated by you. Here's a little different situation, it sounds like, in terms of you're receiving a great deal of content from your fellow self-assigned journalists. Talk a little bit about what that experience is like in production, but also in going into the edit bay and starting to piece this film together as a finished product.
Yeah, this is a totally sort of new beast for me, because I've never had sort of archival footage in any of my films. I mean, in little pieces, but a big chunk of this film is the incredible footage that these guys filmed covertly inside Raqqa, inside the capital of the Islamic State, and it made it both fascinating but very difficult in the edit room, combing through all this footage and also combing through hundreds of hours of ISIS videos as well. Deeply disturbing ISIS videos. And so this film was probably the hardest film I've ever made in the edit bay. So much of this, and I owe so much to my other editors, Matthew Heineman and Pax Wasserman, who cut the film with me. They did an incredible job, and so much of this film definitely was made in the edit room.
And I'm familiar with Pax, has an amazing resume already.
He's great. Yeah, they're both amazing.
To be pulling in these kinds of talents. Talk a little bit about how you feel. Obviously, we all know that Cartel Land was a behemoth of a film in many different ways as a filmmaking achievement, but also when you're shortlisted and nominated for an Academy Award. I have to imagine your life changes, and we chuckled about the many interviews that you did for that film. How do you feel sitting here in January 2017, ready to do that part of your? It's part of your job, right? I mean, media.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, I'm just driven by things that that I'm fascinated by, and Cartel Land was amazing and definitely helped my career, and it was an incredible journey. But that whole time when I was on the road doing interviews, I was just so hungry to go out and make another film, and this film is a byproduct of that. I get very antsy, and I actually started making this film while I was still on the circuit with Cartel Land.
Caitlin, do we need to take a quick break? We don't need to take a quick break. That's fantastic. Wanted to check on that logistics. My next question is, in this process, are you able to shorten your press time, or are you working toward that? I'm guessing that now we're sitting here with it. Have you read the New York Times or the Washington Post and gotten your latest inspiration for your next project?
I think I'll enjoy this moment for a few days. And I'm actually working on a few other projects as we speak as well. So I think I'm slightly super saturated right now. But
that does seem to be I don't know if theme is the right word. We're talking about two films, but in reading the press notes that you had kind of these aha moments, which I think is really cool and interesting, that you were sort of consuming other journalism and receiving the inspiration that you then turned into, maybe in some ways, an extension of the work that those journalists had been doing, whether it be with regards to the cartels and the violence on both sides of the border and how those two things came together. And it seems like this film has some similarity in regard to that, having a moment where you said, I have to make a film about this.
Totally. I mean, with City of Ghosts, you know, as I said, I was traveling around with Cartel Land, and as this was happening, you know, ISIS was becoming front page news, and I sort of obsessively began reading about it and researching and trying to understand what was happening. At first, just on an intellectual level, and then trying to figure out how, you know, how can I tell a story about this. And I, you know, tried a few different things, and they didn't sort of lead to where I wanted them to lead, and they had other issues involved with them. And you know, then I read this New Yorker piece by David Remnick about this group, Rockets being slaughtered silently, and just right when I read it, I knew this was my story. I knew it was my film. I knew it was a great angle into the story. It was a humane way to approach it, and ultimately, you know, it sort of played on these ideas of sort of that cartel end of what would you do if you were living under you know, in the caliphate, in the capital of the Islamic State. And you don't really have too many choices. And so the fact that these guys stood up and started to document these atrocities is a remarkable thing. And so, you know, I reached out to them, and took a couple weeks to sort of gain their trust, and started filming. And the process has been insanely fast. Like, it's, you know, this was just a year ago, basically.
And again, in doing some research and thinking about the history of this place that we call Syria now, but down through the ages and even to antiquity, a very important place that now is known as Al-Raqqa, it feels as though that word, caliphate, contains almost everything of what I would see as what chills all of us to the bone. The difference being that you then went into action and made a film. Is there an esprit de corps as a filmmaker to have a new thing, which is, I didn't shoot all this film myself. This is people surreptitiously with cell phones. The quality is going to be completely different. These are not cinematographers, that kind of thing. But did working with people like that, who are, as you have, and has been made a big deal of, wow, Matt really took his life in his own hands to make this film Cartel Land, and here you are with kindred spirits.
Right. I mean, I think that's, there's been like a lot of things written about the film before. People have seen it and they're like, oh, you know, Heineman is ratcheting up the danger, and that's not at all what has happened. No. You know, this film is, the danger is much different. It's not physical danger, and really those who are in danger are the guys in the group, in extreme danger. And so, in some sense, you know, I just tried to document their story, again, as they're on this exodus leaving, but you know, they're the ones that truly put themselves in danger, and you know, my job was just to document everything else. And you know, I think I felt very compelled, as I said earlier, to sort of document the emotional impact of all of this, and to try to. This is a much more emotional film than Cartel Land was, and you know, that's what I set out to do, much more so than with the last film.
Well, and I have to be intellectually certain that the members of Raqqa being slaughtered silently are very proud to have such a representative as you to take their footage and their message forward, and to give it this kind of a stage that it requires. We should, before we go, we should do screenings upcoming and where folks can find out more information about the film.
Yeah.
You know what? It's okay. I got to close the show, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to get all the details for the folks out there. Thank you all very much for watching. Matthew Heineman, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Have a wonderful festival, and we will see you guys again tomorrow here on Park City Television. Thank you for watching.